In the fury of a Dakota blizzard, even a modern house of brick and timber can become a frozen tomb. The storm claws at every seam, howls through every gap, and strips warmth faster than fire can replace it. Yet centuries ago, native families endured these same winters in teepees of hide and pole. What appears fragile to us was in truth a fortress shaped by survival wisdom. They endured because they understood. They read the wind turn their shelters like shields and built windbreaks of snow. They layered hides into insulation, mastered fire management, and used even buffalo dung and heated stones as tools of life. This is not only a tale of endurance, but of ingenuity. What did they know that we in our age of abundance have forgotten? In the lessons ahead, their design, adaptation, and discipline will speak across centuries. On the open plains, the Dakota winter was not merely cold. It was a relentless adversary. From the northwest, the wind descended like a war host, driving snow across the land with the force of 1,000 spears. The air itself turned against life temperatures, sinking so low that exposed flesh froze in moments. Every sound was muffled, every horizon erased until the world became a white void where direction was lost and time stood still. Yet the storm was not the only danger. Predators, wolves, mountain lions, even desperate bears prowled in the same hunger. To them, a warm fire or the scent of food was a beacon in the night. In such a world, survival demanded vigilance. Here, a single mistake was fatal. A poorly sealed entrance, a fire left untended, or a shelter set against the wrong wind could mean the difference between life and death. On this unforgiving stage, every decision was a test, and only knowledge kept the flame of life alive. The first lesson was simple yet profound. Nature follows patterns. The wind, though fierce, was never random. From the northwest, it came season after season, carving its path across the plains. The native builders understood this truth. They did not fight the storm head-on, for no man can wrestle the sky. Instead, they turned their teepee so the narrowest edge faced the gale. The cone split the wind like the prow of a ship, letting the storm rush past rather than tear through. Snow, too, was both a threat and a gift. To the unprepared, it buried, suffocated, and froze. But in the hands of those who listened to the land, snow became insulation. Packed tightly against the hides, it sealed the base of the teepee, forming a windbreak stronger than timber. The very element that killed the careless could shield the wise. This was their way to study the storm, to see its rhythm, and to turn danger into armor. In modern bushcraft, we call this principle adaptation, shaping our shelter and our fire management to the will of the land, not our own convenience. The people of the plains lived by it. Every family knew the rules align the teepee with the wind, pack snow, where the hides met earth, and trust in the design passed down by elders. To them, the blizzard was not a mindless enemy. It was a teacher, harsh but consistent, and those who obeyed its lessons found life where others found only death. The teepee was never a simple tent. It was a structure refined across generations, shaped by necessity and sharpened by survival. Every pole, every hide, every angle was chosen with purpose. Its steep cone stood as more than a shelter. It was a shield against the weight of winter itself. Snow that would crush a flat roof slid harmlessly down its sides like water running from stone. At the crown, an opening remained a smoke hole. Without it, fire would choke its keepers. With it, flame and family could share the same air. Fire management was central. The hearth gave heat, but the design gave breath. Here, life was balanced between suffocation and freezing, and the teepee resolved both with elegance. Inside, insulation was layered with care. The liner hides, known as dew cloths, and the ozone created a second chamber, a tent within a tent. This inner skin captured warmth, holding it close to the people within. What modern preppers know as insulation and windbreaks, the ancients mastered with hides, poles, and patience. Even the seams carried wisdom. Overlapping hides form natural shingles deflecting rain and melting snow preventing seepage. Nothing was accidental. Each element served both function and survival, a harmony of design and necessity. Today, bushcrafters and survivalists study airflow, heat retention, and structural strength, but these principles were already alive in the teepee. It was survival engineering in its purest form, a dwelling born from hardship, yet refined with insight. Another lesson carved into the memory of the plains was mobility. On the frozen prairie, storms shifted without warning. The northwest wind might roar for days only to falter and return from another quarter, striking with the force of a hammer. A fixed cabin, no matter how sturdy, was chained to its place. But the teepee was not. Families could dismantle and rebuild their shelter in the span of hours. Poles were lowered, hides folded, firestones gathered, and by sunset a new home could rise, aligned to the shifting sky. This was not mere convenience, it was survival strategy. When resources dwindled, when game moved on, when the storm carved new paths across the land, they moved with it. The teepee's strength lay not only in its insulation or windbreaks, but in its ability to travel wherever survival demanded. To the prepper and bushcrafter of today, this principle is familiar. Never become a prisoner to one location. Shelter must protect, but it must also yield to necessity. The ancients understood what many modern minds forget: survival is not only about standing firm, but knowing when to move. Their wisdom reminds us endurance without adaptability is brittle. The teepee was proof that a dwelling could be both fortress and vessel, rooted in the earth when needed, and ready to follow the horizon when the winds decreed. In the endless dialogue between man and nature, mobility was the answer that kept life kindled on the Dakota Plains. On the Dakota Plains, survival meant that nothing was wasted. Every resource, no matter how humble, carried the weight of life or death. Animal fat rendered from the hunt was smeared across the outer hides of the teepee. What to us might seem crude became a gleaming shield, a windproof armor that sent icy gales sliding off rather than tearing through. Fuel was precious. When hardwood was buried under snow or scarce on the horizon, families turned to dried buffalo dung. These buffalo chips burned slow and steady, their embers lasting through the night, a fire management technique born of necessity. Around the hearth, stones were arranged not for decoration, but for survival. Heated by the flames, they stored the day's warmth, releasing it long after the fire dimmed, turning a fragile shelter into a chamber of endurance. Insulation came from what the land offered. Old furs too worn for clothing, bundles of dry grass, pine needles gathered by children, all were pressed into cracks and seams. These simple materials trapped pockets of air, forming insulation as effective as modern fiberglass. Every gap sealed was a barrier against the storm, every layer another chance at life. To the native builders, abundance was not measured in wealth, but in ingenuity. Where one man might see refuse, another saw tools of survival. This principle remains true for every bushcrafter and prepper. The clever hand makes do, and in making do, overcomes. Thus, the lesson endures. It is not plenty that ensures survival, but the wisdom to shape necessity into strength. On those plains, every ember, every stone, every scrap of hide testified that resourcefulness outweighed abundance. And in the howling winter, that truth was carved into the lives of a people who refused to be broken. Survival on the plains was never the burden of one man alone. It was the covenant of the community. In the howling dark of winter nights, families slept shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in furs, sharing body heat as their most primal insulation. Children pressed against parents, elders folded into the circle, and together they became a living hearth. The teepee's fire warmed them, but it was discipline and unity that kept the flame of life alive. Training began early. By the age of 5, a child knew where to sit, how to feed the fire, and how to handle fuel with care. These lessons were not suggestions, but survival protocols. In the unforgiving blizzard, hesitation could cost lives. Fire management, the tending of hides, the sealing of seams, all were communal tasks carried out with precision and respect. The camp itself reflected this order. Teepees were raised in circles, a fortress of hides and poles. Warriors stood on the outer ring, facing the storm and the threat of predators. At the heart, protected by every wall of flesh and will, were the elders and the children. In this arrangement, no one was abandoned, no one left to chance. To the modern bushcrafter or prepper, the lesson is clear. Survival is not only gear and skill, but the bond of trust and shared discipline. A lone fire may flicker, but a circle of fires becomes a beacon. On the Dakota Plains, it was not strength alone that preserved life. It was structure, order, and the unyielding promise of community. In the endless nights of winter, when the blizzard clawed at the hides and the wind howled like a beast circling the camp, survival was not only a matter of fire and shelter, it was also a matter of the spirit. The people knew that despair could freeze faster than the cold itself, and so they guarded not only the hearth in the center of the teepee, but the hearth within the heart. Families gathered close not only for warmth, but for strength. Stories were told, tales of ancestors, of hunts, of victories and trials. Songs rose against the storm, their rhythm steady, their cadence, a reminder that life continued even as the world outside vanished in white. Children played with carved bones or simple games by firelight, their laughter cutting through the roar of the wind. These small rituals were not idle diversions. They were survival tactics as vital as insulation or windbreaks. The ancients understood that morale was a tool of bushcraft. A discouraged camp wasted fuel and faltered in vigilance. A hopeful camp endured with steady hands for fire management and clear eyes for the tasks of survival. In this way, spirit became as much a resource as wood, hide, or stone. To the prepper of today, the lesson is timeless. Equipment may fail, food may run short, but the will to endure cannot be allowed to break. A man can outlast hunger. He cannot outlast despair. On the Dakota Plains, the people preserved that truth in song, in laughter, and in the quiet strength of community. The storm sought to silence them, but the fire within refused to go out. When nature unleashed its full fury, ordinary measures were not enough. In those moments, the people of the plains turned to techniques so extreme they bordered on the unimaginable. They soaked hides in water and let them freeze solid, transforming soft coverings into armor plates of ice. Against the blizzard's claws, this frozen shield sealed every gap, turning weakness into strength. Visibility vanished in the whiteout. To step outside without guidance was to vanish into death. And so they stretched ropes from the central teepee to the outer space's lifelines that could be gripped in darkness and storm. These cords were more than tools. They were the thread between survival and oblivion. Water, the essence of life, was itself a challenge. In wooden or clay vessels, it would crack and split, but the stomach of an animal, dried and prepared, could freeze and thaw without breaking. It became a flexible reservoir carrying life where brittle containers failed. Such methods may appear harsh, even desperate, but they were not acts of chance. They were acts of discipline forged through centuries of storms. To the modern prepper, these tactics speak across time. When the storm strips you bare, ingenuity must take the place of comfort. On the Dakota Plains, survival often hung by a rope, a stone, or the thin wall of frozen hide. And in that fragile balance, a people endured. The teepee was never just a roof against the storm. It was a library of ancestral wisdom, written not in books, but in design, discipline, and endurance. The people of the plains proved that survival does not rest on wealth or abundance. It rests on the sharpness of observation, the art of adaptation, the strength of discipline, and the unbreakable bond of community. For the bushcrafter and the modern prepper, these lessons remain as vital as ever. A shelter that bends to the wind, insulation drawn from the land itself, fire management that turns scarce fuel into steady warmth. These are not relics of the past, but skills for the uncertain future. The teepee stands as proof that simplicity guided by wisdom can withstand the fury of winter. In a world unsettled by change, we too must remember the storm will always return in one form or another. And when it does, the answers may not lie in new inventions, but in the old truths. Truths that teach us how to turn hardship into armor and how to make even the harshest nature an ally.